in sin. They've got to make a change, and he did that so in such a gentle manner and a forgiving manner. He didn't say, "Listen, you heathen, if you don't, you're going to burn in hell if you don't straighten up." He didn't do that.
It was the perfect example.
Yes. All righty. Anything else? Okay. We're going to move on to Christian warfare. Let's go to war. Okay, it looks like the YouTube line is up and going now, so I'll be watching for comments. Thanks. Who's that back there? Is that Mike? Thanks. I'm sure there were some folks going, "What's going on?" All righty. So I'll be watching for comments or questions that come through on Christian warfare. Again, this is, remember the theme, I write you so that you may know you ought to conduct yourself in the house of God. So again, we've got to learn how to conduct ourselves in the battle that is Christianity. Spiritual warfare was a real common theme of Paul's. He talked about it a lot. Even just a short time before his death, he said, what? I fought the fight. I fought it, the good fight. I fought. And he didn't consider himself losing, even though he knew he was going to die. He knew he was going to take up his reward. When I think about this spiritual battle, it is within ourselves and from external forces, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. I think it's also important to think about who is the real enemy. Who is the real enemy? And that's why I mentioned that with Paul. People would have looked at Saul at the time, his name was Saul, as he was the enemy. But was he really the enemy? He was doing everything sincerely, honestly. You cannot question his motives. He was sincere in what he was doing as he ravaged the church. But he was sincere. The enemy was his ignorance and his not knowing, and Satan working through him. That was the enemy. But anyway, and we'll talk about this conflict of living in the world and not of the world. We know we have to live here. We cannot separate from that at all. So the scriptures that we'll look at is 1 Timothy 1:18 through 20. He told Timothy that you've got to wage the good warfare. And he talks about Hymenaeus and Alexander, who he had delivered to Satan because they had rejected the truth. Then in 1 Timothy 6:11 through 16, and verse 12, he says, fight the good fight. And then in 2 Timothy 1 through 13, he says, you have to endure hardship as a good soldier. Now, Paul was in prison when he was writing that, and so he knew about hardship. And he was telling Timothy, you got to endure hardship as a good soldier. He says, no one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. And so that's his theme. So as we talk about, and Bill already, he jumped right ahead, said, who's the enemy? It's Satan, isn't it? It's Satan. But how does Satan manifest himself? We know, we understand it's Satan. How does Satan manifest himself today as the enemy? And I've given you some references here. He said in 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 5, everything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God is how Satan works. And Ephesians 6 and 12, we'll spend quite a bit of time in Ephesians 6 later on. But Paul talks about we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. It's spiritual. And how he uses the world's tools. And some of those tools are people. Satan uses people to attack, to threaten us, to make us become unfaithful. A very common scripture, 1 Peter 5:8, the devil walks about like a roaring lion. And, just rhetorically, have any of us seen a lion roaring around, walking down the street? No, we haven't, because it's a spiritual deal. 2 Corinthians 4, verses 3 and 4, whose minds the God of this age has blinded. And as I think about that, I mean, there's probably lots of things we could say is the God of this age. Whatever we put is more important than God has become our God. So, at the end of this section on here, could a person be the enemy? Did I hear a yes? Yes? Yeah? That could be Satan's complete tool and process. I think of someone who's completely rejected and given himself or herself over to Satan. They have become the enemy. They are doing whatever they can to promote Satan's cause, to thwart everything that we do as individuals and the church does. Yes. Can an entity be the enemy? Absolutely. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about the inward spiritual battle. How do you see that in yourself? How do you see the inward battle that we have inside us, in our spirit, in our soul? What does that say to you? How's that work? Anybody want to weigh in? Worldliness, or wanting to be like the world? Is that? Yeah. How else? That really kind of covers it all, doesn't it? I mean, everything that we want, desire, that interferes with our Christian life. It's that inside. James 1, verse 14 and 15. Each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. The contrast to that, Jesus said in Matthew 6:45, a good man out of the treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man out of the evil treasures of his heart brings forth evil. Does every person have the same demon within them that's fighting for control of their soul? Does everybody have the same problem? No. Everybody's different. Someone may have trouble with sexual sin. Someone may have trouble with just temperament and just the way that they treat people. Do what? Judging other people and putting them down, or just the desire that I want more. He got a new truck, I want a new truck. He got a new phone, I want a new phone. That greed that we can have, all of those can come from within us and fight for us. Yes. Oh, absolutely.
You could get out, you talk about sexual sin, various other things that folks do, greed, that people want more money, they want more cars, they want more than, everything is fine, okay? It's what you call worldliness. But there is no immediate downside. Where you have, where people learn from their errors is when there's an immediate downside. When something happens fairly quickly after they've messed up, then they know not to do that again. But a lot of things people do that are wrong, there is no immediate consequence.
That's a great comment, Mike. And I'm going to, the YouTube thing's back up, so I'm going to try to sum that up so that they can hear it too. So there are oftentimes not immediate consequences to the things that we do that are wrong. And that's so true. And I'm going to add to embellish on what you said a little bit. That's a tool of Satan, is because, well, nothing bad happened right then, so, I can keep doing that and there's no consequences. And so it just continues, and then lo and behold, you look, you're neck deep in the alligators, and it's over. You're done, because we've just eased into it, and you're parents, and everybody's probably giving you the example of you boil the frog 1 degree at a time, and at first he's just fine swimming around. We've all heard that analogy, and it's true, but it's true in the way that sin's consequences work. If we did something wrong and immediately got slapped down, it would be easier. It'd be easier, I think, anyway. Or we'd just do it and then run quicker or something. I don't know. All right. So the outside forces now that we deal with, we think about the things on the outside, and they're probably a little bit easier. I've got a couple of comments I want to go. The outside influence can look just like a neighbor or co-worker or a family member, and that's absolutely correct. I mean, who was one of Job's biggest problems when he got his wife? I mean, I think, and we had a great sermon from Brother Clore a couple of weeks ago. I personally think the devil didn't take her out because he's going to use her. And so he used her and caused Job even more grief. But anyway, think about the outside influences. The most dramatic example is the temptation of Jesus. The devil came down and he confronted Jesus and tempted him in 3 different ways. And of course, we saw how Jesus answered. He answered with the word, is how he answered. Another example I thought of, and this is a passage of scripture that I think about frequently in my personal studies. In Luke 22:31 and 32, Jesus is with his disciples the last night. He's going to be physically alive in his body. And Jesus said, the Lord says to Peter, he says, "Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail, and when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren." And we know what happened. Jesus said, "You're going to deny me," and Peter goes, "No." But Jesus knew. And he said, "Satan has asked for you." And I think about that sometimes. If think about it, if Satan could have taken Peter out, if he could have got him out of the equation, that would have been a huge blow to the establishment of the church and to how things started and how things. He was a great leader, and so that attack on Peter, that overt attack on Peter, Satan asked for him. And if you think about it, Satan asked for Job, remember? Because he confronted God, says, "Well, you built a hedge around that guy. Everything's going good. Everything's hunky-dory. No big deal." But Satan wanted to get a hold of him, just like he wanted to get a hold of Peter. And we know how that turned out. Peter, went through that. It was a great trial that he went through, and he just was sick in his failure. But the story doesn't end there, because we're all going to fail. Peter came back, and I like to say to myself, and it's not how you start, it's how you finish. That's more, how we finish is way more important than how we start, and that was important in Peter's case. Then again in Ephesians 6 that we mentioned, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of darkness and spiritual hosts of wickedness. And we probably, I don't think that I fully understand the implications of that verse and how all that is. But if we look in the world around us and the things that are going on that are combating against the church and against morality, we see those things, and Satan's behind all of that. He's behind all of that, and people are giving themselves over to him to do those things and promote those things that cause problems for the church. And we are probably headed into a time when there's going to be more problems from outside forces on the church that we'll have to deal with, and we'll deal with them. We'll just deal with them, just like the church in the first century did when Nero went crazy trying to destroy the church. And there's also the complaint against Christians that people don't understand Christians. And I've given you an example of Acts 17, verse 7, when Jason was complaining. He says they're acting contrary to the decrees of Caesar. And we are being accused of some of those things today, and always have been and always will be, when we teach and preach what the Word says. People aren't going to understand that. They're going to call us hateful. They're going to call us mean-spirited. But the idea is we have to preach the truth. The Word is going to speak for itself. So there's all these outside forces that we deal with. Can you? Got another comment. Can the devil be different things at different times? Can the devil? Yes, I would say so, wouldn't y'all? He's going to work through whoever will allow him to work through him. It could be, as we've mentioned, it could be Job's wife. It could be, how discouraging was that to the other disciples when Peter did what he did and denied Christ? How discouraging was that to them when Peter was undergoing that temptation and that trial that he was going through? Jesus is going to use, Satan is going to use whatever and whoever he can to discourage us, to make us angry, get us upset, to turn us against one another. Whatever it is, Satan will use any tool he can get his hands on to work. So that's a great question, Jay. All right. This verse is the one I really wanted to spend the majority of the time on, 2 Timothy 2 and verse 4. Avoiding entanglements of this life. And I really think that this kind of covers all of this. And this is probably a big struggle for us. Now, we're fortunate here in the United States. And the Christians who are worshiping in Western Europe and many South American countries, we are not worried that the police are going to come in here and try to stop things. We don't have that fear. We don't have to worry about it. But there are parts of the world that Christians, they're probably scared where they are. They have good reason to be, because the authorities are against them. But we don't have that to face at this time in our nation. But the entanglements of this life we do have to face. And so in 2 Timothy 2 and verse 4, he's talking about, the good soldier. No one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of his life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. And this entangles literally means to weave together, to have two things that are woven together. And the example that the Truth for Today commentary gave is when thorns get interwoven with the sheep's wool. So the wool, you can't use it because it's all woven in with the thorns, the briars. And good old Arkansas, if you try to do a garden or anything, you see, the saw briars are going to come up and you're going to have problems trying to get them out. But that's the picture. It's just all woven in there. So as we look at our life, how do we live in this world and not get entangled in it, where it overtakes us and over-influences us, where we can't really function like we should? The Matthew Henry commentary, he said the great care of a Christian must be to please Christ. And Brother Kaufman in his commentary, all Christians invariably find themselves, in a sense, entangled with the affairs of the present life. And he said we have to be careful just not to be any more entangled than we have to. And what he was driving at, I think, is, we got to work. We got to go to work. There's things we have to do in this life. We got to work. We got to pay taxes. We got to do all those things to be a functioning citizen. It's having the correct balance of what we need to do in order to survive and take care of ourselves. And part of that is being a good example to the community, right? That show that we can live the Christian life and do the right things and still live the life. I really feel like one of the big differences, this is my opinion, okay? My opinion. So it's worth the nickel you're paying for it. To me, one of the big differences between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant is judgment. That Christ expects us to use judgment. In the Old Covenant, you're going to do this on the Sabbath, you're going to do this sacrifice, you're going to use this animal, you're going to do it this way, you're going to do it on this date, you're going to function in this way, you're going to go to this place so many times a year. Where in the New Covenant, Jesus leaves it at, you got to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how do you do that? Do I take him, 2 turtle doves on Saturday, or it's left up to our judgment, and that's why I'm saying that. Now, if you don't agree with that, it will not hurt my feelings. I held the flashlight for my daddy when I was growing up. You can't hurt my feelings, and you never hold it right for your dad. So anyway, we have to use the judgment that we can on all the decisions that we have to make. So how much work is too much? How many hours at work is too much? Is it 20, 30, 40, 50, 60? There are times that we have to kill it, man. We've got to get out there, and we're at work, and it's hard, and it's hard to leave and get things done. But how much work is too much? We're not told. We're just told to do the right thing. And so it's difficult in that way. We have to use our good judgment. And the couple of scriptures that I think really point to that, and I really want you guys to weigh in here. In Colossians 4 and verse 5 and 6, walk in wisdom toward those who are outside, redeeming the time. Let your speech be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each one. So we take a job, right? We got to pay the bills. We got to take care of ourselves, and our boss has expectations of us. He or she expects certain things if we're going to get the check. They don't give us a check on our looks, right? We have to do things. We have to work. We have to do, and so there's that balance to do the right thing for your boss, do the right thing for your family, so that you can do the right thing as a Christian. And that's not always the easiest thing. And that's why Paul is saying, walk in wisdom towards those who are outside. In another place, he said in Ephesians 5:15, walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. He's telling the Ephesian church and the Colossian church, you got to use wisdom in how you live your daily life. You got to think about what you're doing. And that's not easy stuff. It's not easy. The boss calls and you got to do things. And so we have to look at what we're doing for our life and the things that we say, the things that we want, and what do we have to do to get those things. And is it too much? Are we doing too much? Making too many choices? Bill?
Just make sure we don't put any of those things you just mentioned, child, family, whatever, before God. We make God number one before even our family.
Mm-hmm.
So we just make sure on our job, or if we put in too many hours, too much this, too much that, and we do it before pleasing God, make it more important than pleasing God, then that's too much.
Mm-hmm. I want to read a couple of comments that came online here. If you pay from George, if you pay attention and watch where you walk, you can almost find a way out of around the briars. Yes. And another one from Jane Meyer, we are free to choose regarding judgment. And that's the thing, but that's the devil in the detail, isn't it? Making the right choice. Now I want to give you a scripture that Jesus told the disciples before he sent them out. After he had appointed his 12 and he's going to send them out, he said, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And so Jesus told his disciples to be careful and think about what we're doing. And Paul echoed that to those two churches. So, anybody want? Come on, weigh in a little bit. Most of us in here have had a career. We had to work. We had to do things. You never going to work on Sunday? I worked in healthcare. I had to work on Sunday. Where's the boundary?
I think we make it hard. I think the Bible's made it pretty simple in the fact that examples were given us to be service to other people, and you can do that at home, you can do that at work, you can do that anywhere. What we've done is created or lived in a society and lived in a culture that says, I come first, everyone else comes after me. And so the hard part of what you're talking about is letting that part go.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to be here to serve other people.
Right, I agree. It's really our attitude, isn't it, about how we approach those things. You know, why am I doing this? Am I doing this so I, can get ahead, or I can buy that new car? Or what? I mean, why are we doing? The motive behind a lot of that is really what drives that. That's a great comment. Anybody else? Come on, this is everyday stuff here.
Chasing worldly things, being a servant to other things, and there's a balance. It doesn't make you unchristian to want things. It doesn't make you unchristian to want to be successful in your job. Bill Ed hit it spot on. If you don't put God first, all that's vanity.
I like the comments you guys are making. They're really good. When you think about, climbing the ladder at work, it depends on the size of the organization you're in, of course, but if you're in a large organization, there's, these opportunities to move up. But I would say many times if we work like we should, put the priorities correct, we're probably going to get the opportunities in the company that we work for. They're going to say, this old boy or this gal, they got their life balanced, and that's what employers, they want. That's what people around us want. They want to see someone who's balanced and who's even-handed and thinks about what they do and has their right priorities. And if we are in a situation where that our superiors don't want that, then maybe we're in the wrong spot, right? We might have to take a move out and do something else. But the idea of the choices and the comment that came through online about it's, we make the choice, and it's really it is a simple choice to do things first, but boy, the devil just puts that stuff out there to see, doesn't he? He puts it out there, and man, that looks good. Whatever it is that we see. I'll share this. Karen and I were on vacation. We were up in Virginia, not too far from Washington, D.C. We're in this restaurant, and these two girls were talking. There were two waitresses, and they were sitting there, and they were talking about, they have to get their life straight. They have to get their priorities straight. And I was thinking, wow, this is a good. They were being. There was no keeping it a secret. I mean, the whole restaurant could hear it. And the other one said, you're right. And the first thing I'm going to do to get my life straight is to get me a new phone. And she said, I got to get rid of this plan and get me a new phone. I thought, I just said, Karen, we need to get out of here. The priorities were wrong. They had the wrong priorities. And I was sitting there going, I think she's absolutely serious about what she's saying here. And, but anyway, all right, so what's our defense? Paul gives the defense. We have to have a defense. And if you'll turn over to Ephesians 6, this is where we'll spend the rest of our time. This talks in detail about that spiritual battle, spiritual war. And in verse 10, he says, in verse 11, put on the whole armor of God. Then in verse 13, he says it again, put on the whole armor of God. So that's what he wants us to do. Then he tells us what the armor is in verses 14 through the rest. Don't think about, it says, well, for the first thing, have your waist girded with truth, put on the breastplate of righteousness. Don't think about the breastplate. Think about what it is. And as you go through here, the armor of God is in verse 14. It's truth and righteousness. That's the first part of the armor. Then it's the peace of the gospel in verse 15. And the word of God in verse 17. All of these things, this is the armor. It's truth, it's righteousness, it's peace, it's faith, it's salvation, and it's the word. This is the armor of God. This is what we need as our armor, these things. And so what do we have to do? And he tells us in verse 18, pray always. Pray always. With all prayer, supplication, be watchful. With all perseverance. We need to pray always. We need to be watchful. We need to persevere. These are the actions that Paul tells us. Cling to the truth, cling to righteousness, doing the right thing, being the right person. Look at the peace that comes through the gospel. Cling to our faith, the salvation, and the word. And pray often. Watch. Be watchful. And persevere. These are the things. This is our defense. This is how we take on the devil and defend ourselves. The armor is spiritual. Our battle is spiritual. Don't use worldly tools to fight a spiritual battle. We'll lose. We will lose. We use truth and righteousness and peace and faith and salvation and the word. That's how we win the battle. And praying always. So if our armor is spiritual, then we conduct the fight in God's terms, which is spiritual. We can't use carnal tools to fight the devil. We'll lose. That's what he wants us to do, because then we're getting in the mud with him, and it's just like a pig. The pig loves the mud, right? He loves that when we get on those terms. All right, is that the first bell? Second bell. All right, boom, boom. I appreciate the comments that you shared. I'll probably make one or two more comments next week when we begin class. And then next week we'll talk about our relationship with the world. Pray for all men, praying for everyone. I appreciate everyone that weighed in. I appreciate the folks that sent in comments online, and so I appreciate that very much. Thank you.